Hello, and welcome to the Pro Series Conversations from CheckBox Pro. My name is Missy, and I'm the founder of CheckBox Pro, where we help school leaders become their most efficient and effective selves by matching them with ed-focused executive assistants. Each member of our team has over 10 years of experience in the education sphere, and though we may consider ourselves pros in some areas, we can't be an expert in every area. This is why we are excited to bring folks working in the education space to offer tools, tips, and insights to make the life of a school leader even more sustainable. Roger Campbell II is an award-winning speaker, Telly Award recipient, and visionary AI strategist with over 15 years of technology expertise. As founder of Gemstack and co-founder of the AI Business Foundry, he transforms how businesses implement AI through his proprietary AID framework. With experience developing programs for tech giants like Microsoft and Amazon, Roger combines technical brilliance with business acumen to make AI accessible and actionable. His background as a software engineer, educator, and strategist allows him to bridge the gap between complex technology and practical business applications, empowering organizations to leverage AI for measurable growth and innovation. Hi, Roger.
Hi, Missy.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Roger, you are one of those guests that I have on the show upon occasion. I haven't had too many where truly what you do goes completely over my head, right? I'm just I wish I knew. Obviously AI is pretty new for folks. But I really do feel like a granny when it comes to this stuff. Maybe that's a little bit offensive to the grannies out there because I do have some friends in their 80s who are way more tech savvy than I am. But it's just new. It's new. So I'm super excited to just learn more and specifically how AI is going to kind of come together, right? Or with education and what that looks like. So, but before we get into that, I would just love to learn a little bit more or have you tell our listeners a little bit more about how you got into this work and why you are so passionate about it.
So starts a really long time ago. I won't age myself, but my parents bought me my first computer when I was 5. And they were always back then there was no internet and we did not have cell phones. But my dad worked for Philips selling digital devices, so hand recorders and fax machines. And he's got his hands on this computer and he's my son needs to know how to use these things. Everyone in offices are using them and my son needs to figure this out. My mom's heck yes. So that kind of started me on the trajectory of being a technologist. And I always consider myself a technologist first. And fast forward to my 20s, I started working in IT's help desk and bounced around at a bunch of different jobs. And, have always been tinkering with computers and then starting to work in the industry. I realized that there's this love for processes and just trying to figure out how things work when it comes to business and technology. So when it was help desk, it was how does my computer work? And then I started to find out there's this thing called software engineering where you can write code to make machines do things. So I started to self-teach myself that. And then later in my 20s, decided to go to a boot camp to learn how to code. I took a very non-traditional educational route into engineering and finished a boot camp, went to work as a software engineer for a while, and then went back to that boot camp and taught, which then started the second phase of my professional career, which was education. So I was teaching career transitioners how to learn how to code. And then fast forward, started my company Gemstack, where I started doing that from a consulting perspective and helping companies like Microsoft and Amazon create curriculum to teach people how to be engineers. And as the AI boom started to become more accessible to the average person, clients started to reach out to me and ask me, since you've been teaching us about software engineering, how does this now correlate to us teaching our people how to use AI? Which then transitioned my company from focusing on just software engineering education and blockchain at that time to AI strategy and education. So it's been a bit of a journey. And I like to just tell people that my job is to come into organizations and help them figure out, based off of your goals and what you're trying to achieve, how do we leverage technology to further those goals?
Love it. Love it. That sounds real easy. You make it sound real easy. And then you've tried even just, because we are friends on the side and have this business group that we work with. And
Yeah.
you've walked me through some of this a little bit. And like, Missy, why have you not done X, Y, and Z thing? Or have you heard of this thing? And I'm like, oh, that feels like a lot. It feels insurmountable, but it's also like necessary, right? And so I'm glad somebody's out there doing it, and I'm glad you found this pathway from, from software stuff to then, lovely transition into AI and helping people get it. So,
Thanks.
okay, so this podcast, right, is intended for education folks. So my
Yes.
hope is that they will be able to glean maybe some insight or best practices about how and where they can use AI within their organizations. We know it has real potential and it's a powerful tool for any industry. So K-12, right, education is it's no exception. And so we got to figure out how to use it in a smart way. So my hope is that after our conversation, Jay, like school leaders will have some questions that they can ponder, right, as they consider where it fits within their organizations, whether that's in the academics or in the operations side of their school buildings. And I think, you'll be able to hopefully give them that, a little bit of an insight into your framework or your questionings that you might, provide for them. Without further ado, just big answer, right? Or big question. How can AI be used to support K-12 schools in their day-to-day operations, whether that's from administration, right, and then admin side of things or the operation side of things, to classroom instruction?
Yeah. So big question. So a lot of ways is how I wrote my talking points here to start with. Tutoring students in the classroom, I think, is a big way that you can leverage generative AI. So when I say that, I mean like ChatGPT or Claude or for Copilot, depending on the ecosystem that you're working in. Developing curriculum for teachers is another really big way that you can utilize this. And empowering teachers to spend less time on administrative and focusing on their students and personal lives. Because I know educators, not only just teachers, but administrators spend a lot of time in the classroom or in the office. And then when they go home, they spend a lot of time working on things too. So what I mean by this, diving into that a little bit, is I'll start, one big thing I really like is the tutoring aspect. And I try to do this a lot myself, is by teaching teachers and administrators on how to communicate better with ChatGPT or tools like that. You can actually start to use it as a tool to educate yourself. And it can sometimes remove the burden from the student when they feel like they're falling behind. I know there's sometimes when teachers have to spend a lot of extra time with students, and whereas they can do that, they can also empower them with these tools to be able to help them themselves. From the administrator standpoint, there's a lot of ways that they can go about using it to automate things within the office, whether it's like student intake or responding to emails, writing up specific grants if they're trying to get grant funding or anything of that sort. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I think when I normally have these conversations, people become overwhelmed with the ideas that I end up having because they're like, "Oh, that's great, that's great, that's great." But where do I start? And what I always try to tell people is that the best place to start is looking at where is the most redundant thing that you're having to do in your day to day, normally on the computer, and looking for an opportunity where AI can maybe help you do that faster. So if you're in your inbox a lot, can it help you write? If you're grading a lot, can it help you grade? Things like that, like trying to correlate it to like what's the redundant thing and where can the tool be plugged in to help me here.
And you mentioned a few different tools, right? Like ChatGPT was one, and then I think you said Claude. Like, so are these schools or just businesses and organizations having to tap into various types of AI in which to solve a different problem, or is it ChatGPT can solve the problems as long as you're training it in the way that's gonna do the thing that you need to get it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when I use the term, or when I talk about the tools, ChatGPT or Claude, or you might hear Gemini or Copilot, these are all what we call large language models. And a large language model is a AI model that you can communicate using natural language. So when we go to chatgpt.com, you can ask this large language model a question and it can use its knowledge to then give you a response. This is very different than if we were to talk about a tool like, let's say, Fathom, which is used for call recording, where it can log on to your Zoom calls or your Microsoft Teams calls. It can listen to the call and give you a transcript afterwards. That is an actual AI tool that actually uses ChatGPT under the hood, versus a large language model is also an AI tool, but it is more of like a platform that you can use. just to kind of keep it a little bit more straightforward. And when I talk about ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini, these again are large language models. You can kind of correlate that to the difference of like search engines. When we think about a search engine, we have Google, we have Bing, we used to have Ask Jeeves, right? And these were all built by different companies. So it was the companies who built these search engines that you could use based off your preference. It's the same thing with a large language model. The different types, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, are just built by different companies. ChatGPT is OpenAI, Claude is Anthropic, Gemini is built by Google, and Copilot is built by Microsoft. So when, as an organization or as a school, when you can start to think about which large language models do we want to use, it can very well be dependent on, are you already a Microsoft school and you're using Microsoft as an environment and you have an educational plan with Microsoft, then Copilot might be a prime place for you to start because you already have a partnership there. If you're in a Google environment, you could use Gemini, or if you want to. So it's more of a decision on, from that perspective, as a large language model, which one do we want to use? And then adjacent to large language models, there are tools that we can use for very specific tasks that normally have nothing to do with like the brand of large language model that we're working with.
Oh, okay. Elaborate on that. So like most of our listeners and or schools now use Google. Like that's, unless they're super large organizations and have, but for anywhere from like single site to, roughly maybe 10 schools, G Suite is just like the sweet spot. Like they do great with, student platforms and things like that. So let's follow that thread a little bit. So then if that's the case, like Gemini would be probably a good starting place for the language model, the AI language model.
Yes.
But then you're talking now about tools. So if I'm wanting to, so tell me a little bit more about that branching out of Gemini.
Yeah. So if you're using Google Workspace, I would highly encourage you to start with Gemini because you're probably already paying for it, or you can start to pay the little bit of extra money a month. I'll say a little bit, but you can pay the extra money a month to be able to use it in your environment. Most Google Workspaces now have Gemini embedded in. And what I mean by that is you can use Gemini inside of Google Docs to help you write documents. You can use it inside of Google Sheets to help you like fill out a spreadsheet or analyze a spreadsheet. You can even use it inside of Gmail to help you actually like summarize and write in your emails. So that is where a large language model is embedded into your existing programs that you're using. So now when I talk about a tool is it's similar, not similar. They're basically SaaS platforms. So when I say SaaS, it's software as a service. An example of that could be Monday.com or Jira for project management. I don't know if we still use it, but Blackboard in schools. Okay. Like these are programs that other people have created that you can pay a monthly subscription to, and it helps you to perform some type of job task. So when we say AI tools, they're normally that. They are SaaS platforms that you can purchase for a monthly subscription or annual subscription for a specific use case or use. So example of this would be call transcription. So let's say, I use this within both of my organizations. We have a lot of sales calls. We do a lot of consulting calls, and we're talking with people just like this back and forth. And the one pain point there is that when you're having a conversation, you need to pay attention and take notes. And when you're trying to do that, you can't fully pay attention when you're taking notes. And when you're taking notes, you can't fully pay attention, right? Like vice versa, it's an issue. So what you can do is you can use one of these call transcription AI tools, and it will put itself on your calls, listen to what everyone is saying, and then provide you a transcript at the end. And it'll be like, here's what Roger said, here's what Missy said, oh, and here's a summary of the whole call. So this is an example of when I say a tool that you could then use that someone has built for a very specific use case that solves a problem for you.
So that tool is independent of, say, Gemini. So you're using both in tandem to solve different problems. Very cool.
Another example might be in Canva, right? You might have a Canva subscription, and Canva has now built out AI capabilities. So you can have it be able to create images for you in Canva. It might be able to write content for you in Canva. That's another example of an AI tool or an AI empowered tool. So it's, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I just hadn't. I mean, I have clients who use Monday. Obviously, lots of schools, and like in my own business, we use Canva, and I don't even think about like associating those things with AI. And maybe it's because there's a difference. Maybe you can use Canva or Monday without using AI. Is there an integration process there, or are those softwares already kind of full, like, am I using AI without even knowing I'm using AI? Is that?
Oh, now there's a state. Yes. Yeah, yes, you are. I mean,
Okay.
you've actually been using AI for the last 15, 20 years without realizing
Oh,
it. Every
good.
time you turn on Netflix and it suggests a video or a movie for you to watch, that's a form of artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah, I guess
But
so.
without going too far down a tangent here,
Yes.
because I can talk about this all day, what we're seeing now when we talk about ChatGPT and everyone says AI, we're really just talking about generative artificial intelligence. So when we say generative AI, what that means is we can now communicate with AI in a way of giving it a prompt or saying like, hey, I want you to write a letter for me. And then AI is able to take that and do a thing and create it for you. And that is generative, the fact that it can generate based off of your prompting. But there are other forms of AI that you're already probably using in your schools, which is every time your email filters, right? Like it's able to read your emails and then suggest things or auto filter things. So there's a lot of ways that you've already been using it and don't realize it. And now we're at a point where it is more accessible at your fingertips without like more tangible, I'd have to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, but to answer your initial question there of is it embedded in the tools or an integration, some of these platforms like Canva, like Blackboard, like Monday, they are building AI capabilities into their software. So there's one case where it's like, as a business or as a school, excuse me, we need to be using AI and trying to find unique ways of using it. But there's also another perspective of looking at it from what are the tools that we already use? Are they already building AI into this? And can we use that to empower our workflows to do more with less?
I love doing more with less. That's like,
Yeah.
I'm all about efficiency. It's my favorite
Right.
thing. It's my favorite thing. Okay, one thing you mentioned, which I think happens, I mean, the number of meetings that school leaders are in and support staff are in, whether that be with board members, whether it be with parents, whether it's just within, other team members. And some of these are really high stakes, right? So think about a board meeting, or we have quite a few, and I'm gonna embarrass myself for a second and be like, what are they called? But they have, like, for special education, right? Like they have oh my goodness, what is the name of that? IEP meetings, right? So like a student has an IEP, it has to be reviewed by the parents, it has to be reviewed by staff, it has to be reviewed by, and so those are in those conversations in a board meeting and in like an IEP meeting. I can understand what you're saying, where it's like, you really do need to focus because big decisions are being made about whether it's your entire organization or about this one particular kid's like academic success, right? And the supports that they need to be successful. So you would want you want everybody to be present, but you also need to capture a lot of notes because there's out of those meetings come very important action steps. So I'm like, well, this makes sense to have something like Fathom or come in and to record and transcribe and summarize, and that feels so beneficial. Maybe my next question kind of gets into like the ethics a little bit, is like, this AI now has access to very sensitive data, budgets, HR issues, obviously student information, and just like the privacy that they would need to be protected from. Like, how can school leaders feel safe allowing AI into some of those important pieces of their organizations, to be used ethically and responsibly, and still honoring everybody's privacy? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah. It's a tough one. One, I'm not a
Yeah,
lawyer,
yeah.
and two,
Disclaimer.
the lawyers are still trying to figure this out. So the way I normally tell my clients how to approach this is, before we just start trying to use AI as a wand and wave it in every aspect of what we do, we have to sit down and figure out what are our policies and procedures and our risk tolerance around the way we use these tools and allow it to interact with our data. So, for example, it might be a prime opportunity to use it in a board meeting because everyone there is a consenting adult. And as long as everyone in the room is okay with us using this tool, we could possibly be okay with then leveraging one of these tools to record that conversation and make our notes, and so everyone can be more focused. But when we start talking about a student and having that kind of information, is that something we want these tools to have access to? Do these tools have the right security on the back end to be able to secure this data and not make it accessible and not be providing it to models for training. So when I say that, there's new versions of LLMs that come out. ChatGPT 3.5, then was 4, now is 01, and they have to train these models with data that they get from people interacting with them to make them smarter. Now, that's not to say they'll ever be able to say, what did Missy and Roger talk about today at this time? But it can change the collective way that these large language models think, we'll say, very loosely. So I say that all to say there is a level of decision making that needs to happen at the administrative level of assessing what's our risk tolerance when it comes to the data that we want to use these tools with. What is the parameters we want to put around how this data is used? So prime example is like in healthcare, we use real patient data for research, but we sanitize that data. So rather than attaching that data to someone's name, we give everybody an ID number. Rather than it being Roger is an X-year-old man with these health conditions, it's unit number 00123 is this age with it. So we can take that particular approach. But I'm getting down the rabbit hole of just basically saying that there's a conversation that needs to be had at the administrative level. It's not to say that you can't use these tools in these situations, but you do need to take the time to understand what's the data we want to have this interact with. Are we okay with that? And making sure we put the proper controls in place. And that could be having a conversation with your representative with Google Workspace, if you have one, because they helped you set it up for your school, and seeing if it has a transcription tool that can be safe to use or not. It could be bringing out an outside party to have that conversation with, or it could be saying, you know what, maybe that's not the right space for us to use AI just yet. Can we use it somewhere else?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that actually is a really good segue into kind of where I think where you are really gifted in is like kind of getting people to think through those questions and what they're and asking themselves and their organizations, right? Those important questions. So if we were to consider schools that are in the very early stages of considering how to use AI, what are some important questions that they can be asking themselves to begin this process of integration, or even really knowing where to integrate? Like maybe they already have ideas, but maybe they don't. And so, so early stages, what are questions they need to be asking themselves to figure out how to use AI?
Yeah, I think one area is, how do we want better insight from our data? And when I say data, it can be, our school population. How are we doing on test scores? How's our reviews from our teachers? Things like that. Is like, so understanding what better insight that we want from our data can then help us to say, maybe this is how we want to use the tools. Getting education on these tools, I think, is one of the first place before we even think about starting to use it. There are so many resources that are now coming about for education on what these tools and what this technology is capable of and where it can be used. I would implore you as educators and as administrators to go through that before you just start using the tools. I think that's a real big common misconception, is like all the thought leaders are out there telling you like, use AI today, like you have to use it. And I think we forget sometimes as educators that we have to educate ourselves on things before we use them, right? Like, it took a long time for schools to it took a long time for schools to allow kids to use Google back when Google first came out. Like, I remember there was a part of time when they were like, no, you can't use Google for research because it's plagiarizing. And then it's like, oh no, now we know that you can search for data and you can find articles. And what we really just need to do is teach students how to cite this stuff that they're finding on Google. And now we're going to empower students with citing and how they can use that. And then all the different citing types came that I can't remember, but it's like the OWL one in this.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other thing is starting to look at, so outside of getting the education, if you're going to start using these tools, start looking at considering private versus public AI tools. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't think Fathom is a good tool for a school to use. And the reason why I say that is, like, Fathom is an awesome piece of technology. I use it every day. But you're using that person's server. Like, that company is storing all of your data and you don't know what they're doing with it on the back end, right? And that's not to say they're doing anything nefarious, but you don't have any clue. You're paying a monthly subscription and they're letting you use it. Versus Google Workspace normally sets up your own private infrastructure with that. You have your own private Google Drive. Yes, Google is connected to it on the back end, but it's just your self-containing unit. And there's normally things that you can do around permission in Google admin to make sure certain people have access to the tools or not. So starting to look at what tools give us the controls that we need as a school to be able to use them versus what tools do not. And I think that's a really good distinction for administrators and educators to start trying to think about when they start looking at these tools. Now, if you wanted immediate tools that I think you could be using today to speed up your job, looking at the tools inside of Google Workspace, the Gemini that's inside of Word docs, the one that's inside of Excel. You can set up a lot of things and use those in a lot of ways that make your job and your life easier. I would be careful with using like student data. So like I wouldn't say like have Gemini write an email to a parent that is like spelling out their specific school plan. Now, mind you, it's probably reading it in the background, but you can most definitely use it to have a quick communication with a parent, right? And say like, hey, we need to talk about so and so. Want to schedule a meeting at this time? You know what? I'd like this message to get cleaned up. Like have Gemini clean that message up for you, or you get a spreadsheet with a bunch of maybe data on it that you don't want to read through, and you can have it do that. So yes, without diving too far down the rabbit hole, which I tend to do, those are some of the things that I think can be helpful. One is just trying to understand like what tools are you using, who has access to that data, whether it's a company in of itself or something that's more private to you, and then starting looking for quick wins in the things that you already have access to, like Google Workspace.
I want to follow this thread because I use it so much in my work that I do with clients on a daily basis. And I think there's areas in which I can be like, my company is here to make the lives of leaders more efficient and effective. And then if I can make my workflow more efficient and effective, then now I'm just compounding, right? Like this is great. Like now the work that we're able to accomplish, it grows and it becomes exponentially, has an exponential impact. So thinking about, again, I'm going to stick with Google for a second. When you mentioned like we as educators need to educate ourselves on these tools before we, just adopt them or roll them out. How do you train like, how do you learn about Gemini? Like how do I learn how to use Gemini effectively? And I'm thinking, honestly, you mentioned a spreadsheet. I'm in spreadsheets all the time. It is a big pain point for leaders where they have all of this aggregate data, just like, oh my goodness, it's all of the students, or it's all of the teacher feedback, or it's all of like teacher effectiveness, right? And they need to make sense of it and make decisions. And sometimes those decisions need to happen very quickly. So how would they train themselves on like, okay, I have this spreadsheet of data. I want it maybe just summarize. Is that a tool that Gemini offers to be able to take this information and summarize it for me? And if so, how do I learn how to do that within Gemini? Like, where are the tutorials? Tell me more.
Yeah, that's a great question. So shameless plug, part of one thing that secondary organization that we're spinning up is the AI Business Foundry. And in that, we will be offering those types of learnings. So stay tuned for more to come there. But YouTube is a great resource. There are a lot of content creators that are out there that are creating content around it. And Google in and of itself is starting to create a lot of content on how to use these tools. If none of those work for you directly, you can also ask these tools themselves. So you can go to Gemini and just be like, hey, are you able to do this? And it can tell you. So if you go into Google Spreadsheets and there's a button for Gemini that you can hit and you can chat with it inside of your spreadsheet, and you can ask it, are you able to give me a summary of this document? Or here is my problem. How would you best suggest we solve this together? So that is where I think, at least where there's a large language model in the picture like Gemini, you can have it be your assistant, and just using natural language to communicate it just like you would to an assistant can help you to learn how to do more. So a lot of it is just tinkering to start when it comes to being in the tool. And then outside of that, those resources that I said, I think would be great places to start.
Okay. I need to just do some tinkering. Which is like tinkering takes time. I know. That's part of it is like time. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to screw up if I start tinkering in this space? And I'm like, oh no. But you can't really
So one thing I'd recommend with the tinkering is like, it doesn't have to be in the, like what we would call in engineering, the production ready environment. So like I would not suggest tinkering in the spreadsheet of all of your instructor feedback from the last year, right? But like what I would do is I would maybe make a small document or use something that's not as big of a deal, or jump into a blank document and be like, hey, Gemini, I want you to create a document that mimics customer feedback and fill this spreadsheet in. Can you do that? And then if it does, great. Now, okay, provide me a summary of what information is in here. Or go online and ask for a template or an example of X type of spreadsheet in Google Docs or in Google Sheets, and see if you can find an example, and then see if Gemini can help you to do that. So there is, and this is one thing that we have conversations with organizations about, and especially with schools. I know time is of the essence and it's a hard thing to find, but if you're going to use these tools and you're going to try to embed this technology in what you're doing, there is a requirement to provide that time in some way, shape, or form to your employees and teachers and administrators to be able to study and upskill. So whether it's bringing in a facilitator or allowing them time in the summer or during breaks, or maybe getting an extra planning day on the books, like there is a necessity for upskilling here. And as challenging as that is, it's something that we have to make the time for. And I'm not saying that as like a waving a bad, like bad person for not doing it, but like in the mindset of approaching this, we have to allocate that time in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Okay. One final question kind of in regards to this, and then I'm going to make sure that you have an opportunity to like fill in any gaps that maybe I just have missed. And you're like, what do you, Missy, how did you not ask me this question? Are there any common misconceptions about AI in education? Is there anything that leaders should know? I mean, I know you kind of mentioned them a little bit as far as like, check your tool and make sure you're using it with, not, giving access to just anybody with all of this information and data. But yeah, are there any other common misconceptions that might be preventing schools or leaders, or really kind of maybe anybody from adopting or integrating into some of these AI tools that maybe you're like, you really don't need to be afraid of that. You don't need to be afraid of that robot.
Oh man, loaded question. So I think one that's big that I hear in educator circles is like not wanting to let students use AI because they think it's eroding critical thinking skills. And boy, does that grind my grits.
Ooh, I love a soapbox. Do it.
Yeah,
Get up there.
yeah.
Get up there, Rod.
I will stay on this hill all day. Now I'm not saying that it can't erode critical thinking skills. But if we go back to my earlier comment around Google and how it was opposed initially by schools, I will correlate that to this. So yes, if we just have students arbitrarily using ChatGPT or Gemini to complete their homework, yes, we are ruining their critical thinking skills. But if we teach them, so like one of my favorite ways to use ChatGPT, I'm a huge history buff and I love watching history documentaries. And I remember as a kid, my dad and I would watch these on Saturdays and we would have conversations back and forth. And before the internet, I would have questions. And if he didn't know, we'd have to go to the library and look up an answer, or we just didn't ever find out. And then with the internet, it was me and Google I had to read through. But now I use ChatGPT to help me answer those questions. So I will go on to it and I'll either type or I use its talking capabilities, which are really awesome. And I'll be like, hey, I watched this documentary on this time period. The presenter was talking about this thing. And, I have a question about this. Can you explain that to me more? And then like, it will give me a response, and then, okay. Well, that sparked another question. Like, can I ask you about this? And then it'll give me that. So I use that on history, and we had a Lord of the Rings weekend here at the house the other day, and we used it on Lord of the Rings. Yeah, So like I think from an educational standpoint, for students, we need to empower them to learn how to leverage this technology in a way that makes them better academics, that makes them better learners, And I don't mean better in that they're doing something wrong, but if we push this technology to the side and tell them not to use it, they're going to misuse it. And it's our job as educators to teach them the ways on how to use these tools. Because I'll tell you this much: my company, we do a lot of strategy work for businesses, and every business is trying to figure out how their employees use these tools and how to use this technology. So if we're not teaching our students how to do that, we're putting them on the back foot, especially those in high school right now, because by the time they get out in the next year to 4 years, like, this is going to permeate through their job. And like, that is even more magnified for anyone under ninth grade. So that's a huge misconception that I think needs to be kind of curved, is this thinking that we shouldn't be letting students use these tools in the classroom. And more so turn to, okay, how do we empower students to use these tools? And it could be something as simple as just having them use a scavenger hunt. Like, we're teaching this subject in science about neurons, and, here's your textbook. You can use your textbook. And then for the questions that it asks at the end of the textbook chapter, I want you to use ChatGPT to give you initial answers and then revise them. And then I want you to walk me through the steps of how you did that. So you read the chapter, here were your notes, here were the questions, this is what ChatGPT told you, and this is how you were able to either make it make more sense to you, or how you were able to change what it told you so that you could write a paper on it, right? Like, let's give them those skills so they can then translate that into the workplace. Another big misconception that I think is that because of the data concerns, we shouldn't be using these tools. And I know that is scary, like, to think about, like, student data and parent data and how are we exposing, and it's most definitely something we need to be concerned about. But don't let that stop you from finding ways or bringing in the expertise to do this. And that leads me to my last point on this, at least for now, is that you have to do this yourself.
Yeah.
There is a whole industry of consultants and people that want to help, and want to be able to provide this knowledge. So I would also challenge administrators to start seeking out those. And even if it's coming to people like me who maybe aren't directly in your industry and talking directly to schools, but might be helping businesses or other types of organizations, to see if they would be willing to give you the time. And I'm not just saying that for me, but your local universities are looking into this. They have college students that are working on this, that are looking for internships and opportunities. So being creative in the ways that you're looking to gain knowledge, not just a Udemy course or a YouTube video, but are there people who are out there who are maybe writing a doctorates on AI and education? And do they need to do case study work? Can you use those resources to come into your school and help you?
Roger, those are good ideas. I really like that. Yeah.
Thanks.
And kind of being on the forefront of, yeah, because you're right. It's still new enough that people are starting to do the research, and they need some, you might have opportunities to get some free partnerships that are
Mutually beneficial.
Mutually beneficial, for sure. I think that's great.
Not to add another thing to your to-do list, not like it's not already long enough, but
I know, but you know what? Yeah, you gotta put the time in, and I think you're right. And like, I think there's quite a few grants coming out now too, because there is this encouragement and shift towards using it and adopting it. And yeah, you don't want to wait too long that then all of a sudden all that potential partnership or money or whatever dries up, because they're like, well, no, you should already be on this. Like, this has been around too long. Like, you've missed the opportunity. So now you actually have to pay so much more money because we have to catch you up. You still use a paper pencil on everything. Okay, anything else before I ask? I have one final question that I ask all of my guests. And so, but before we get to that one, I just want to make sure, is there anything else that you're like, I've got to make sure that, listeners know this, before we sign off?
Yeah. So, two initial thoughts.
Yeah.
One, to your last comment of getting to the point where you've fallen behind. That's a really big comment that I think a lot of influencers are saying, like, you have to get on AI now or you're going to fall behind. To some extent, I think it's a bit of hogwash.
Okay.
Um,
Another
and
misconception.
I do think it is another misconception.
Yeah.
Like, the technology will continue to accelerate. Like, we are at a point where technology is at this like huge curve, like going up, where there's just all these new tools and these things coming out. And I was having a conversation at a meetup yesterday for AI founders, and everyone was all excited about like, I'm working on this and I'm working on this, and there's so many cool tools, and like, yeah, that's great, but like, there's also a line where we have to work on catching people up, and there's also a line where some of this technology is going to stabilize in a way that it's going to become commonplace. So if we go back to when the internet first came out, I mean, first it was dial up, and like not everyone could afford dial up. And then it was like not everyone had access with dial up, because like my mom's on the phone. For those of you who don't know what dial up is, but you actually used your home phone line to get onto the internet, and your
Yeah.
phone, your computer actually called the internet and then made a connection. Right?
Bless.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then we got like, then we fiber optics came out after the road, and then DSL, and then Wi-Fi, right? And there was points in times where some schools had dial-up, but no schools had internet, and then like some schools had Wi-Fi, and some schools only had dial-up. So I think there's also this stabilizing that will happen
Mm.
over the next couple of years. You have people who are at the forefront, who are very exploratory and figuring all this stuff out, but eventually there will be a settling of, here are
Mm.
some common practices and commonalities and consolidation of these tools that are going to get bought up by larger companies, and standard operating process. Like, all of that is coming to. um we're just we're pioneering right now, right? So
Yeah.
it's all the people out front, going out into the wilderness and wrangling the trees and the snakes, so to speak, to then clear a path for the rest. So I say that to say, like, does not mean like you should just like kind of sit on your hands and wait, but I think it should also remove some of the anxiety of that. I have to do something right now. I have to do something today, and changing that thought process into like, what's one small thing I can do
Mm.
today, or what's one small thing we can work on this semester? What's a large goal that we can say for this school year that we want to try to do? And that goal could just be learning more,
Yeah.
right? And that is good enough, because the robots are not going to wake up tomorrow.
Okay. They're not going to take us over tomorrow. Okay, good, good. We have time to arm ourselves. That's a really good analogy. I appreciate that. That is, I
Yeah.
think, helpful for me, because I always feel like a little bit behind.
Yeah.
Um, Even in clothing trends, I'm like, man, I just caught on, and then they're like, well, we've moved on. we're not in skinny jeans anymore, ma'am. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
But I do think that's helpful and you're right, like it all stabilizes, and that everybody has Wi-Fi now, and it's
Yeah.
not that those that got it, 3 years after their counterpart got it is all of a sudden not able to excel at the same level. It's like, yeah, you're
Right.
doing great. So,
Yeah.
okay. So that was one. I think you maybe said you had a second one.
Oh, I might have got lost on that soapbox.
It's a good one. It's a good
It
box.
was. I love that one. Yeah, and I guess the other thing, that was it.
Yeah.
Don't take on the burden yourself. Especially from the organizations that we consult with, I always try to tell businesses, this is a top down to bottom up effort. And what I mean by that is, I think it was Steve Jobs who said it, is I hire smart people to tell me what to do, not to tell them what to do. And you have a lot, not that he was the greatest boss, there's a lot of things on that side that we probably shouldn't take away from, but that quote in of itself was like genius. I was like, you know
Yeah.
what, that is right, delegate and elevate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have all of these smart, as an administrator, as a person, as a board, as the person who oversees, or the people who oversees your schools and your school systems. You have hired a plethora of people who are smart and caring and love what they do. And even more so, you have a whole student body who is excited and interested. And outside of that, you have a whole parent network who is excited and wants to see how to use this technology. The one common thread around AI is everyone is curious. So rather than making it a singular effort at the top, is if you at the top can define, these are our goals for the next year. This is what we're trying to do for the next 5 years. And then use that to be able to empower the masses within your orbit to help you to learn and grow and find use cases. It's so empowering. So like an example for that I like to give is when I was in high school, or when I was in middle school, they were building a new high school. We were going to be the first 4-year graduating class. So what they did was they created a board of eighth, 7th, and 6th graders to help name the school. So rather than the school district making that decision for the student body and the parent body, the parents and the students who were going to be attending this school got to select or got to choose representatives. And then my mom and I were one of them. And we got to go sit on this board and name the school. So we went out and we asked everyone in the school district who was going to be attending that school to submit names for the school, submit colors for the school, submit potential mascots for the school. And then we as the board got to sit down and decide on what we named the school. The school ended up being named Coral Glades. It's in Coral Springs, Florida. We picked the jaguar, and teal is our color. But this was after thousands of submissions from the student body. And now that school's been around for quite a few years. So if you can take that same mindset into how you adopt AI within your schools, it removes the stress and the burden from you as an administrator of having to come up with it all by yourself, and gets the buy-in and the empowerment of the student and school and administrative body to feel like they are a part of the decision-making and getting to drive that forward growth. So I would highly encourage you to take this to everyone within the school and make it a collective effort rather than trying to put all the stress on yourselves.
Love it. Love it. Great advice. Great advice. Okay. Well, then I have my one final question. Okay.
Please.
It is in the spirit of my company's name, CheckBox Pro.
Mm-hmm.
What is one box, big or small, personal or professional, that you hope to check off today?
Ooh, that's a good question. Personally, I have been getting into reading more just for fun. I do a lot of reading for work and like technical documentation. So I started reading a book and I'm like halfway through it. So today I'd like to finish 2 chapters.
Oh, okay. What book is it?
It's called Renegade.
Okay.
It's from the series, The Spiral Wars. So it's a sci-fi book. It's about space. So it's like one of 9 books, and I have been engrossed in it for the last like 3 weeks and read like half of it. No, actually like last week and a half, actually, sorry. And read like half of it at night. And like I've set up like this iPad holder on my bed, like next on my bedside table, so I could just like lay in bed and scroll through the book. So my fiance will come home at night and I'm just laying in bed reading. So it's been a really big thing for me, that it's like trying to get away from work sometimes and over focusing on things and take some personal time. So if I can finish 2 chapters today, that will be a huge win for me.
I love that. I love that for you. And I encourage all of our listeners, because that's my advice for lots of folks, is you got to find your spots of joy. That is not, hopefully you enjoy your job, but you need to be like separate from that at times. So that's great. Love it. Okay. Well, for our listeners, if you want to learn more about Roger and his company Gemstack, you can check them out at gemstack.ai, or you can connect with him on LinkedIn. He's really active there as well. And he would love to help. Like I said, he helps organizations figure out and ask themselves the question, what are your priorities? Where can AI fit in? What are your goals? And how do we make the proper matches to make sure that you are accomplishing everything that you set out to do? So, and schools love goals. We got lots of them. School leaders have lots and lots of goals and not a lot of time. So AI feels like a very natural and necessary next step. So, all right, Roger, thank you so much again for joining us. I really appreciate your time and just your insight. And also can I just say, your posture towards this was really refreshing. Just this posture of, you're going to be fine. You're not behind. Don't stress yourself out. I think that's really important for me to hear, but I think leaders here, where they are in high stress their days are just stressful. Like it's really stressful, like maintaining and trying to be, always looking out for, hundreds of students, right? And so to have somebody go, hey, this is one area in which you are allowed to like play in a little bit and get to enjoy and just do it when it feels right and not do it now. So I think that's really helpful, and I appreciate the posture. So,
no, not a problem. And I thank you for the opportunity. I am so excited for what the future holds. And as Missy said, like, please, anyone out there who's listening, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Don't think just because I work with organizations that I can't help a school, and I am willing to just donate time even too. So please reach out if you have questions or have concerns. Like, I think it's very important for our students and our schools to be able to know how to leverage this technology in a meaningful way that makes an impact for them. So I'm here as a resource. Please use me.
Love it. Awesome. All right, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you all for listening to today's Pro Series conversation. Our team is always looking for more pros to learn from in the field of education. So if you have a recommendation for a future guest, or maybe you are the pro, then send us a note at info@checkboxpro.com. And if you want to hear from more pros, then like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And by doing so, this also helps more folks find our show. So take a moment to check that box off your list today.